church? Hell no. Are you no longer feeling comfortable in church? This podcast is for individuals who are desperately missing God, but don't know how to find Him. Substance abuse, domestic violence, sex offenses, acrimonious divorce can contribute to discomfort in the church. For these individuals, church is just not an option anymore. Ordained minister Dennis Hall and his guests invite you to listen to this podcast for topics that are inspiring, uplifting, and will bring hope to those who just feel church is not relevant in their lives today.
I'm Dr. Dennis Hall, and I am delighted that you're listening to this podcast. These are interesting times in America. You know, sometimes I think maybe I should just stop watching the news because there's so many things that are disturbing and troubling. Sometimes I think I'm becoming a cynic, meaning someone who believes that human conduct is motivated wholly by self-interest. Or maybe I'm a realist, meaning that I see things as they really are. Or maybe I'm just a jaded political conservative. Now, I do admit to being a conservative evangelical follower of Jesus Christ. But in any event, I'm troubled by what I see unfolding across America, although from time to time, I'm encouraged. Just before recording this podcast, I was watching a newscast that was at the University of North Carolina, where apparently a group of protest students, pro-Palestine protest students, were attempting to take down the American flag and put up a Palestinian flag, if you can believe that. But what happened was a group of students intervened. They intervened even though bottles and rocks and things were being thrown at them. They intervened and prevented the American flag from being taken down. And to the credit of that university's administration, they joined with those students protecting the flag and had the flag put back up. So sometimes there's encouraging things that we see on the news, but it is troubling to see this anti-Semitic Palestinian pro-Hamas protest on university campuses all across America. And this chanting of "from the river to the sea, Palestinians will be free." This is a phrase that's advocating the genocide of Jewish people, the genocide of the people living in Israel. They're talking about the very area where Israel exists. And even more troubling is this chanting we hear right here in the United States, "Death to America, death to America." Now, this phrase is clearly advocating the destruction of the American government. It's seditious, and it should be prosecuted as a seditious act. You know, it's being reported that these protests are being paid for by organizers and outside agitators. And or maybe the best way to say it is these outside organizers and agitators are being funded by people that do not have a patriotic view of the United States. Several news outlets have reported that funding is coming from George Soros organizations and organizations funded by the Rockefeller brothers. Now, George Soros is one of the wealthiest men in the world, a billionaire who became very wealthy as a hedge fund manager on Wall Street. And, he supports what he calls a globalist society. He doesn't believe that the world defined by sovereign nations is capable of controlling climate change issues or nuclear proliferation. And he's also funded all across the United States campaigns for liberal district attorneys. And, his ideas about globalization really smack of socialism and Marxism. So you ask, why is he funding these protests on college campuses? Well, I'd suggest that it's because he supports anything that would destabilize existing establishments and governments that would get in the way of globalization. I got a feeling that he thinks that a global society, one that doesn't have national borders, is better for investments of an organization like he and his son manage. The behind the scenes answer is it may be greed. It may be greed that's driving George Soros to fund these campus protests. Secondly, it's troubling to see the former president of the United States being tried in a New York criminal court for attempting to suppress a story about his relationship with an adult film actress. From everything that I've read and everything I know, there's nothing illegal about paying money to suppress stories that could adversely affect a political campaign or someone's professional reputation or a corporation or a company's market position. That there's nothing illegal about this. This district attorney made it known that he was out to get President Trump when he was running for office. Apparently, the prosecutors are arguing that the funds used to suppress the story are political funds that are slightly above the political contribution limits. And Trump's position is that he only gave funds to his attorney and that the entire case is simply election interference since he's running for re-election. He is the presumptive Republican nominee for re-election as the president. And I just have to ask, can you believe that we are, for the first time in U.S. history, spending millions of dollars trying a former U.S. president over the appropriateness of an accounting entry? Really? What's the motive? Could it be power and greed? Could it be power and greed? This trial is on the heels of another trial in New York, led by their attorney general, who also campaigned on the idea that she would get former President Trump. This civil fraud case, there are no victims, and all the banking institutions that had loaned money to the Trump organization were repaid with interest. And I'm told that all of them would love to do business again with the Trump organization. All these banks did their own due diligence. And the allegation is that the Trump organization overstated the value of some assets in their loan applications. Now, anybody that's had any experience at all in placing a value on commercial assets knows it's very difficult and can result in a wide range of values. The true value of an asset can only be established on the day that it's sold, when the market tells you what the value is. Now, here again, we seem to have another trial aimed at former President Donald Trump, and the motive seems to be greed and power. And then in another New York courtroom, a jury awarded $83.3 million in damages to a longtime magazine columnist who sued the former president for defamation for calling her claim that he had sexually assaulted her in a Manhattan department store dressing room a lie. Now, frankly, for me and many others, her allegations just seem to be preposterous on the face of it. If you just think about somebody like Donald Trump assaulting somebody in a dressing room, in a department store, it even became more preposterous when she couldn't remember, the details or the dates, only that it happened in the spring of 1996, 27 years ago. Now, it is true that Trump was livid over her accusations that he had attacked her, and he took to social media asserting that she was a politically and financially a motivated liar, even insinuating in Trump fashion that she was too unattractive for him to have sexually assaulted, and that she would pay dearly for speaking out about this. And, apparently the jury felt that Trump's verbal assault was reprehensible, and thus should get this kind of verdict. I'm reminded many years ago, I was the administrative representative of a healthcare organization that had been sued. And I won't go into all the details of the case, but I felt like our attorneys had put on a tremendously understandable and comprehensive defense, and was shocked when the jury brought back a verdict against us, a 7-figure verdict against us. And this was troubling to us because we were a self-insured organization. We didn't have an insurance company we could go to and pay for this. And so we asked the judge if we could interview each juror privately, alone, in a room as he dismissed them, so we could understand why they brought back a verdict against us. And I was astounded. Every juror to the person almost said the same thing. And it went something like this. It said, we knew that your organization had done nothing wrong. And that's why we did not give the plaintiff more money. What? They knew we had done nothing wrong, but instead they decided to give the plaintiff what they considered to be a low amount of money. We're talking about 7-figure money, $1 million plus money. And that's what we were told by each and every juror. In other words, it was just nothing more than a transfer of wealth. A transfer of wealth to someone that they felt sorry for. Now, these are the kind of things that undermine our faith in the judicial system. Now, thirdly, we have a case in Florida where a special prosecutor who has never been confirmed by the Senate is also prosecuting the former president for taking classified records to his Secret Service protected Mar-a-Lago residence. The facts are that a president has the privilege to declassify records. In the case of President Biden, who began taking classified documents to his home, unprotected area, while he was a senator and later as vice president, there's been no effort to prosecute. Now, I want to make it very clear here regarding my opinion about this, and that is neither Trump nor Biden nor any of the others that have taken classified documents to their home had any motive or there is any evidence that it was to aid and assist a foreign nation. It just seems to me that this is a lot of hullabaloo about nothing. It's it's like an overdue book at the library. If there are documents that need to come back then, ask the court to order to be come back and order confiscation if it's not brought back. Why in the world is a criminal trial occurring? What's the motive? What's the motive? Again, it appears to be power and greed. And then fourth, we have this case in Georgia where the infamous district attorney, Fani Willis, has accused President Trump and 18 co-defendants of trying to interfere in Georgia's election results in the last presidential elections. The election results in Georgia were very close. And it appears to be because Trump made a call to the state leadership in Georgia, asking them to see if they could find another 11,000 plus votes, which is the difference in the election results. He's accused of election interference. Now, it seems to me, and I think most people across America, that not only was it appropriate, but should have been the case that the sitting president should challenge a close election result. Nothing came of it. And, the election was eventually certified, including the Georgia results, and Biden was named president. So again, we have to ask, why in the world are we attempting to prosecute a former president? I keep coming back to the same conclusion: power and greed. Greed became apparent in the middle of these legal proceedings in Georgia. It was in full display when it was learned that the prosecutor, Fani Willis, was paying her lover, who was married to another woman, over $600,000 to be on her staff when he had no experience as a prosecuting attorney. During this time, she and her lover were taking these lavish vacations that her lover apparently paid for from the sums that he was being paid by her office. And of course, Fani Willis said, well, I reimbursed him. So, that seems to, in her mind, make it all right. But I just want to tell you, and it's the feelings of people all over the country, this stinks. Now, her lover is now dismissed from the staff, but this whole judicial process in Georgia is tainted. It's tainted. It never should have been, this case never should have been brought. What's going on here? Power and greed. Power and greed. It's said that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And then fifth, the current policies for immigration at our southern border have created a dangerous travesty for our country and a human tragedy for those caught up in this situation. Unbelievably, more than 6 million now, illegal immigrants have been taken into custody during the Biden administration. And more than 2.3 million illegal immigrants have been released into the United States. A lot of these sanctuary cities are complaining. They're complaining about these illegal immigrants arriving in their city. Another 365,000 unaccompanied minors were allowed to enter and placed into federal shelters, later being released to a parent or someone who claims to be a parent or guardian. It's also reported that 1.7 million, known as gotaways. The gotaways are people who have avoided, apprehension. are also in the U.S. illegally. And, among those detained by the Border Patrol are individuals on the terror watch list and known gang members. These numbers are just catastrophic. They're catastrophic because there's no health screening or vetting of these individuals. It's placing our country at great risk, and the economic cost to communities is enormous. I just have to tell you, when you really begin to study this, the same words begin to come up: power and greed. Now, you may not realize it, but slavery is alive and well today all across the world, and it comes in the form of human trafficking. Human trafficking is today's form of slavery, as men and women and children are recruited and exploited by being forced into labor against their will. They're slaves. A recent report on human trafficking shows that 27.6 million people are in modern day slavery. It's become a $150 billion a year industry. And it's rapidly growing, according to all the experts. There are many forms of human trafficking, most notably sex exploitation, as well as domestic servitude and factory and agricultural work. The victims of human trafficking experience physical and psychological abuse while being pretty much isolated from the world. It's a tool their captors use to control them. For most countries, human trafficking is primarily an internal problem. But here in America, there's been a dramatic increase in transnational child sex trafficking since January 2021, due to our de facto open border and unaccompanied alien children policies. The South American cartels are using children to get single adult males, not just across the border, but through the Border Patrol process. And once these men are granted a stay, they smuggle the children back across the border so that they can be continue to be trafficked, recycled, if you will. Studies done by the Latin American branch of the Coalition Against Trafficking in Women estimates that 60% of Latin American children who set out to cross the border alone or with a smuggler have been caught by the cartels and are being abused in child pornography and drug trafficking. One time we had a program that allowed DNA testing of migrant families that were deemed suspicious of fraudulent activity. This program was designed to help prevent minors from being trafficked or recycled, and it resulted in many criminal charges for adults exploiting them. Yet this program was met with great disdain by activist groups and lawmakers, and is no longer being used by the current administration. Now look, I think we can all agree that the most heinous, wicked human trafficking is child sex trafficking. Published estimates indicate that there are more than 1.7 million children in sex trafficking worldwide. Some experts claim the numbers are much higher. This is a worldwide evil. In the United States is the number one destination for trafficked people, and Mexico is the number one supplier. Through the first half of last year, there were more than 70,000 encounters of unaccompanied migrant children. And the government, sadly, has acknowledged that they've lost track of more than 100,000 of these migrant children here in the United States. Just lost track of them. Whether intentional or not, it appears that the U.S. government has become the middleman in a large-scale, multi-billion-dollar child trafficking operation run by bad actors seeking to profit off the lives of children. Now, I don't mean to sound political, but under the Biden administration, human traffickers are busier than ever, expediting the flow of migrants across the southern border. And President Biden has made it abundantly clear that his administration does not wish to stop illegal immigration. You know, they failed to enable the necessary enforcement of immigration laws that are currently on the books. Doesn't require any new legislation. Just enforce the rule of law, the laws that are on the books. Now, child sex trafficking is being accommodated in the United States by open borders due to the U.S. government and Mexican government actions and inactions. Now, we don't have time to get into this discussion, but I feel obligated to mention it. There are a number of religious, non-governmental organizations that are financially benefiting from the present situation on the southern border. According to the Pew Research, most Americans oppose the current border policies. And power and greed plays a huge role in why nothing seems to be changing in our immigration policies. But I want you to know I see something much more ominous as a trend in our country that may explain a lot of things. You know, we seem to be a nation that's losing faith in the value of our heritage. We see this in so many ways. You know, we don't seem to want to hold fast to the rule of law. And this contributes directly to our inability to secure the border. You know, a new moral order seems to be increasingly taking root with regard to our national sovereignty. The idea that nations should be about the business of self-preservation over an amorphous common humanity, this seems to no longer hold sway. There are many who fall into this globalist ideology, and that is having sovereign borders is not good for the future. That's part of this debate, national debate, that's occurring over whether we should have leaders who are about the business of making America great. Making America great. There's always been a strong correlation between Christianity and patriotism. You know, it's the religious practices that provide the moral compass for a nation. You know, recent reports show that the lowest level of belief in God in the U.S. ever reported is what we have today, according to Gallup polling. A Wall Street Journal poll demonstrates a rapid decline in religious faith and patriotism. And then the Barna polling that's tracked for 30 years, a decline in the Christian worldview and a rise in what we might call watered down Christianity and secular worldviews, including Marxism. Now, what happens? As Judeo-Christian influence declines, other spiritual forms, or I should say spiritualized forms of social justice, religion, and worldviews are quickly rising to take its place. Marxism and environmentalism have come together, creating new quasi-religions that are not conducive to maintaining the borders of our nation. Left-wing activists, they argue that their moral vision mandates open borders as a form of compassion. In other words, if you think our country should have borders as a sovereign country, and that we need to have a process that decides how many and under what circumstances should we allow somebody to migrate to the United States, then you're considered somebody who is not compassionate, that somehow you are not compassionate. Listen, if we fail to exercise stewardship over this inherited nation that we call America, then, we're no longer going to be this shining beacon of hope to immigrants in the future. The bottom line is this, as opposed to these postmodern false religions and secular worldviews, it's Christianity that enables us to look beyond the present and inspires us to support necessary institutions like the rule of law. It's things like this, the rule of law, that's going to make a civilization like America available and possible for future generations. If America is going to survive, it absolutely must reverse this moral decline in our country. Addressing the evils of our open border will certainly contribute to stopping this decline, and the opposite is the case. If we're going to allow the evils of our open border to persist, it's going to hasten America's decline. America, especially Christians, we must speak the truth about human trafficking and the wickedness of child sex trafficking, and demand that the federal government enforce the laws of our land. Now, as I wind down this podcast, I think about the fourth president of the United States, James Madison, who is popularly acclaimed to be the father of the Constitution, for his pivotal role in drafting the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. President Madison wrote this: "But I go on this great Republican principle that the people will have virtue and intelligence to select men of virtue and wisdom. Is there not virtue among us? If there be not, we are in a wretched situation. Do you suppose that any form of government will secure liberty without virtue in the people?" This is what Madison called a mythical idea. In other words, liberty is at stake here. And without selecting the people of moral virtue, then our nation will cease to exist. Psalms 11:3 asks the question, when the foundations are being destroyed, what can the righteous do? What can the righteous do? God-loving Christian people must not only pray, but we must get involved. That means speaking to our family, our neighbors, our elected officials, and expressing our opinions in the voting booth. I challenge you to do that. Thank you for listening to this podcast, and may God bless you.